Hello, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is called Rose Lemonade from Taylors of Harrogate. Taylors? I think so. Anyway, yeah, so it's an herbal infusion, fruit herbal infusion. It has all the basic herbal tea basics. It has like hibiscus and rose hips and stuff like that, and then it has the lemon balm and flavoring and some and roses, obviously. And I mean, it's probably good iced as well, but it's a very relaxing and very fragrant smelling in a good way tea. So I'm enjoying it. And I got that a couple weeks ago at Marshall's of all places, but I was like, well, haven't, updated my herbal teas in a little while. So I didn't feel so bad. And then I got another tea. We'll have that another time. Today I am going to do a wrap up of February and March reading of this year. I'm leaving out the mystery novels because I'm just going to do a separate one for that. Just even though there's only a few books in that that I've read of the mystery novels, I think 3 actually. I think that would take up its own video, really. So, but I thought I'd combine otherwise the 2 months because I have read a good amount, but I've also DNF'd a lot. I've returned a lot of books to libraries. Just kind of flitted around a lot of different books. Some of which I might continue with, and some of which I've just done with. So, and not done reading it, but just. So it's been a little. I don't want to complain. Oh, it's been so hard or anything like that. It just it hasn't led to a massive amount of books finished. Is that a big deal? Probably not. If I'm enjoying myself, for the most part, I am. So, but February was particularly a slower reading month for me. I had a lot going on that month anyway, but it was still good. It was still what I read. I liked. I didn't absolutely love what I read, but I liked. So it's not a terrible thing. I've been distracted. I don't know if distracted is the right word because it kind of goes along with my reading, but with history, I'm just so wrapped up in history right now, especially obviously English history, mostly British history, and medieval, Tudor, Stuart time period seems to just be, I don't know, taking up a lot of my thoughts right now, and that's not a bad thing. It's not bad to have a little bit of a focus, but it was distracting from other things. I'm easily distracted. So let's talk about the 2 books that I excuse me again with the clearing of the throat. So lovely. The 2 books that I finished in February. Actually, I finished 3 books in February, but one of them I already talked about in a video because I finished it so early that I just counted it in January. Yay! So, the book that I'm most proud of finishing, of all things, is a book that I picked up when I was on my trip to London. I picked it up, I think, in the Waterstones in Gower Street that I went to with my friend. That was like one of our favorite book shopping experiences because it was just a really cool location and the way it was set up. And I love books about books. And so, of course, I had to get at least one on my trip. But as you will probably know, if you're ever, excuse me, taking notes on what I'm reading, you're welcome to do so. But, is that often the books that I buy, I do read eventually, but then I also get library books, and so it takes a while to go through the books that I've purchased. So if you see a haul, you may not see it being mentioned for a while afterwards. That's not that I don't want to read them. I just have so many books to read. It's crazy. Don't we all? But still, no self-control. But this one I finished, and I was glad I did because it was a fun book about books. It's the Bookseller's Tale by Martin Latham, and it's already been a bit damaged. It got damaged in my bag, but also, and you can't see it here, but I could feel it in the back. My cat bit into it, Freddie. I don't know, he's always hungry. So there's a cat in the front, so maybe he was just responding to that. Right. Now, it wasn't until I was maybe halfway through this book that I noticed that this author was the same author who's a writer whose book I DNF'd last year. It was a library book that I had about London because, it was shortly before my trip. And it wasn't a terrible book. It's just that it was badly, I always complain about this, when it's badly edited and some facts are like really off. And that traffic. And that might not be his fault, it's Martin Latham's fault. It might have just been the publishers or someone didn't pick it up or whatever. But I mean, as always, I'm always like, if a book isn't holding me so much, then I will find any excuse to DNF it, especially if it's a library book, because I need to move on. And this one had its moments, but then it mentioned something about a poet that I was a little bit familiar with, and it said he died in like the late 1600s. He died in the late 1500s. I know that. It's one of the few things I remember about this poet, and that turned me off. I think I might have mentioned this in the previous video, but it was just so, I mean, you can't catch that. So it was like the final nail in the coffin, or whatever you want to call it, the last straw, etc., that broke the camel's back, etc. And so when I realized that, for a moment I was like, should I keep going? Because I was so frustrated. But I said, I'm not going to hold it against this guy. This is a good book, and if there's anything that's off with the years, I don't know it this time, so that's good. It is a kind of, it's funny because this quote says that it's a joy magpie blurb, minded, relentlessly engaging. That's the blurb by David Mitchell, and it is kind of like that. It's a bunch of stories, but like true stories, like research he's done about readers, about types of reading, about reading through adversity, women readers, different topics like that, interspersed with his own sort of memoir about his own experience as a bookseller, which I love because I have not had an opportunity to ever work in a bookshop of any kind. I've spent plenty of time in bookshops. I might as well have worked at certain places because I end up showing people where things were. But I've never formally worked in a bookshop. So I like to live vicariously through those who have, which was great. He even mentioned working in the Waterstones in Kensington at one point, which is one of the ones that I've been to, although they've changed the location since he worked there. Only thing I wasn't crazy about, and I don't know if it was intentional, but sometimes it seemed a bit name droppy because he mentioned a lot of like well-known people that has dropped by shops that he's worked in. It's not a terrible thing. People like names. People like hearing about people that they are familiar with. And some of the names that I heard, I was like, hey, I know that person. That's kind of cool. So it wasn't a tragedy, but it was just sometimes a little bit annoying. But it was, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say in here that it's lively, but it was lively enough. I would say if you are a person who likes to read books about books, nonfiction books about books, then this could be a good one to add to your TBR. Or not, if you have too big of a TBR. No, you know what? Add it. It's good. Our pile will never end. Let's face it. But yeah, it was enjoyable. Worth the purchase, I think. And so the next book that I read, and this feels a little bit like it was preparing for March Mystery Madness because it's a nonfiction book about mysteries. And this is Agatha Christie Poirot. Agatha Christie Poirot. I don't know. That doesn't sound right. Anyway, that's because on the side it says Agatha Christie's Poirot. See? I'm finding errors. I'm getting annoyed. Anyway, Agatha Christie's Poirot, The Greatest Detective in the World by Mark Aldrich, with a foreword by Mark Gatiss, who has written some TV shows that I've watched before and acted in them, and I like him. I like him well enough. But this is just a book about Poirot as he has appeared in Agatha Christie's books and subsequent other writers' books, which not too many, but as he has appeared in radio shows and so radio, theater, television, film, etc. And I think I thought when I first heard of it, maybe I didn't read about it enough, I thought it was going to be more of almost like a biography of Poirot, just getting, I think other people have tried that before, just getting all they could glean from Agatha Christie's books and made like a life story about him. But maybe that wouldn't have been so good. I don't know. It wasn't terrible. I know when you say it wasn't terrible, it doesn't sound very inspiring. But it was just a description of exactly what I said. Everywhere Poirot has appeared, and that's not a bad thing. It's a good reference, especially if you are someone who wants as much information about Agatha Christie related things as possible. This is fantastic. It is definitely part a good part of your collection. I'm not like that. I don't need to know everything about Agatha Christie and her creations, but I didn't mind reading this. In fact, yeah, reading it in February, there were some definite moments of enjoyment in certain parts. I think I enjoyed it more talking about the books rather than, say, the theater and a lot of the other TV appearances, radio shows. I did enjoy reading about Poirot, as always, as depicted by David Suchet. So that I looked forward to, and I'm glad that that was covered pretty well. I mean, why wouldn't it be? And I have to say, I'm going to give this book a lot of credit for one major thing, because I read a lot of books about books, and I am spoiled to death. And I've already been spoiled with Poirot, because I've seen the adaptations so much that I already know basically who done it before I read them, if I haven't read it already. But, excuse me, now it's my nose. It's also allergy season again. Good times. When isn't it allergy season? But, yeah, so he does not spoil. He doesn't, Mark Aldridge doesn't, like, somehow narrowly avoids in every chapter spoiling what happens in Agatha Christie's novels. And that is fantastic, because it shows that it can be done. It can be done, people. I know some books that you're going to need to give away certain things for reasons, but not every book about books has to do that. So, or biography or whatever. So if that's something that you're interested in, definitely get a hold of this book. I got it from the library, and I'm glad I did, because it was a perfect book to read and return to the library. So, which I will do subsequently. So yeah, I know I'm not super enthusiastic about it, but it was enjoyable enough to take my time reading. I think I started in January, so it was like over 2 months. It was a good leisurely look at Poirot. I didn't feel constantly like, oh, I can't wait to find out what happens next kind of feeling, which I actually do feel in a lot of nonfiction. So good, not great, right? Okay, moving on to March and the non-mysteries that I read in March. I read one non-mystery novel, but it was historical fiction. And this doesn't actually complete this series for me, because there's one book that I DNF'd because I just couldn't get on with it. Nothing against the writing, I just couldn't. And I'll tell you why, because this is the 6 Tudor Queen series, by Alison Weir. This is Anne Boleyn, A King's Obsession. The king being Henry VIII, obviously. But the one that I still haven't read, or I should say finished, because I did start it, was the one about Catherine Howard. Sometimes I can read about her, like I read the nonfiction book by Gareth Russell, I think his name is. Oh, I hope I'm not getting that wrong. But was fantastic. Recently I read that, and I totally recommend it. But sometimes I just can't live her life through her point of view, Catherine Howard, just because it was it was just so sad, in my opinion, that her life, first of all, ended rather young. We don't know exactly how young, but also just, and just how frustrating it is, how she almost never stood a chance. I know she did some things wrong, but still, it's like, my goodness, goodness. But anyway, maybe I'll get to that eventually. So I'm not done with the series quite, and I know that there are short story collections combined, that accompany this this series, but I can't find it in my library, and I'm really trying not to buy any more books right now, so that'll have to wait till another time. But this is Anne Boleyn, and I knew I had to read it because like, I read it out of order. I had started with Jane Seymour onwards, and most of them are really pretty good. And then I started again with Catherine Raragon, and now I'm like, okay, need to get to Anne. And I have to say that I think this is one of the better ones. Of course, as a historical fiction writer, you cannot just blandly tell a story of this happened that day and this happened. You have to kind of throw in what would be otherwise speculation, like, did this really happen? For instance, and this is the one they want to say, there is a description of her meeting a certain painter that was at the French court the same time as Anne Boleyn, and or artist altogether, painter, sketch artist, etc. Amazing person, Renaissance man. But and it's very entirely possible that they met. If you're in the same place at the same time, you could have met. But so making it that they encountered each other and met and were able to talk isn't far-fetched. It's just that you couldn't say in a biography that this happened. So I kind of liked, okay, let's play with that. Let's have a little fun. And that wasn't bad because it wasn't overwhelming. It wasn't like he was a major character in the book. It was just a little side moment. So that was okay. And there were a couple of little like, oh, could that really have happened? Or, oh, I don't think that went that way. But that's how historical fiction should be. There should be some moments of like speculation turned into a plot point. And I'm glad that I read this because it just had yet another point of view. And I liked it because putting it not in first person, but from Anne's point of view was good because you do see her almost evolving into the Anne Boleyn that we know by the end. She was always intelligent and attractive in some way, not considered as pretty as her sister, but somehow, attractive to the point that the king was able to wait many years for her and do all kinds of overturning for her. So that's pretty amazing. But you see in the beginning how she is and her learning different things about courts and how to behave, and also women at court and the fact that some women that she encountered were able to be great thinkers and come up with ideas and do some leadership. It was a little bit hypocritical in a way sometimes because even well into the book she would talk about how Isabella of Castile was able to, lead in her own right. And I'm like, okay, you're saying that, but who was her daughter? Catherine of Aragon. Maybe you should stop using her name. Hello. But I mean, I don't know if she did that in real life. But yeah, so you see that person, you see the person who enters also into, the Henry VIII's court and was, serving Catherine of Aragon, and how that she had deep respect and she cared about her, and then how that changes as she gets involved with Henry and as the relationship heats up. And then you see her getting more ambitious and more, wanting power, not just for the sake of power. Sometimes there were good motivations behind it, but you could see how she turns into the Anne Boleyn we know later on. Not evil or anything, but, maybe made a couple of bad choices. But I don't like to blame her for what happened to her because in Henry VIII's court, it was impossible. It was almost impossible unless you were Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, to make it through that life without, losing your head. So I enjoyed that. I would say if you want a good novel about Anne Boleyn, this is a good one. This is a good choice. And next, another Tudor related book, but this was nonfiction. And this came out last year. Actually, the sticker on this, it's a library book as well, says December 2022. So quite recently. I just saw this in the library when I was returning a book. And I was like, oh, I have too many books out, but I can't resist this. This is Blood, Fire, and Gold, the story of Elizabeth I and Catherine de' Medici by Estelle Paranque. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. She's French, so I'm hoping, I don't know. Me and French goes back and forth with both pronouncing things well and completely butchering it. But so this is a kind of a dual, not so much biography, but biography-ish, but mostly a lot of the story does go from their encounters. When I say encounters, these two never met in person, but their relationship over the years, which was kind of volatile. It went all over the place. So Catherine de' Medici married the son of Francis I, who was king, basically contemporary of Henry VIII. So she was a little bit older than Elizabeth. But she gave her husband like a bunch of sons and daughters, and somehow by the end of her life, most of her sons were dead, and the one who was still alive and king, was going to die shortly afterwards. That is one of those moments that you kind of want to show to Henry VIII and say, hey, you want sons, right? But having a bunch of sons does not necessarily mean you're going to have a dynasty that's going to go on forever. But anyway, he wouldn't have been around to see that, but Elizabeth would have. And so it's it's interesting because Catherine, once her husband died, she basically took over in her own way, even though she wasn't the queen. She was the queen mother at this point. She was never reigning. You don't in yikes, in France they didn't have female ruling queens at all, but she was the authority because she was basically like a regent in the beginning and throughout. It wasn't until toward the end of her life that her authority was really less so. Even then, her son relied on her in a lot of ways, and so dealing with not only having as a daughter-in-law Mary, Queen of Scots, so having something in common with Elizabeth, having this person who was a little bit of a challenge to deal with, to say the least, but also just the religious divide was interesting because Elizabeth obviously leaned Protestant and Catherine de' Medici was Catholic, but not only that, but this was a time of kind of civil war time period, and especially between religions, Huguenots and the Catholics. It was a very difficult, volatile, did I say volatile already? Anyway, a difficult time for, religion and for different types of relationships. So different challenges, but similar ones. And also the fact that Catherine kept trying to marry off her sons to Elizabeth. One of her sons came kind of closer than most people. But then at the very end, Elizabeth pulled out. It would have been her last chance at marriage anyway, and just squeaking by if she wanted to have kids. So that was it. And just kind of like it was almost like a little bit of a chess game that went on between them. Like sometimes one of them had the upper hand, sometimes the other one did. And I have to say, this was very enjoyable to read. It almost read like a novel because it had conversations, and quotes and everything. It was very well told. And if you have an interest in the Tudor time period in either England, Tudor England, or that era in France, or both, or if you're just curious, this is good. It does give you a lot of background, a lot of things that you might have known already, but if you don't know that much, you're clued in on more. And yeah, I would really, this is one of, to me, of all the books that I've shown you today, this is probably the one I would recommend the most if you like reading nonfiction, but interesting nonfiction that's not dry. Definitely. So yeah, that's it for the books, the non-mystery novel books of the past couple of months. And I will hopefully be back soon with more, another wrap up soon about the mystery novels. But in the meantime, let me know if you've read any of these books. Let me know what you think of them, if you want to read any of these books now, or if you've been turned off by any of these books. And that's all for now. This is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.